You ever hear stories about places so dark, so forgotten, that even the bravest avoid them? Well, I never believed those tales until I found myself standing at the entrance of an abandoned mine outside Johannesburg, South Africa. The air was thick with dust and something else, something I couldn't quite place. The kind of silence that presses against your chest and makes your skin crawl. They say the mine was shut down decades ago after a series of strange disappearances and accidents no one could explain. Officially, it's just old, unsafe ground. Unofficially, people whisper about something lurking down there, something that waits in the shadows, patient and hungry. I'm an ex-military guy turned freelance investigator, always chasing stories no one else dares to touch. When I heard about those mines, about the things people saw and never returned from, I knew I had to see it for myself. But before I go any further, where are you watching from? Drop your country and city in the comments. I want to know who's following me into this nightmare. Because what happened inside those tunnels changed me. It changed everything I thought I knew about fear.
You ever hear stories about places so dark, so forgotten, that even the bravest avoid them? Well, I never believed those tales until I found myself standing at the entrance of an abandoned mine outside Johannesburg, South Africa. The air was thick with dust and something else, something I couldn't quite place, the kind of silence that presses against your chest and makes your skin crawl. They say the mine was shut down decades ago after a series of strange disappearances and accidents no one could explain. Officially, it's just old, unsafe ground. Unofficially, people whisper about something lurking down there, something that waits in the shadows, patient and hungry. I'm an ex-military guy turned freelance investigator, always chasing stories no one else dares to touch. When I heard about those mines, about the things people saw and never returned from, I knew I had to see it for myself. But before I go any further, where are you watching from? Drop your country and city in the comments. I want to know who's following me into this nightmare. Because what happened inside those tunnels changed me. It changed everything I thought I knew about fear. The sun was sinking behind the hills when I arrived, casting long, twisted shadows over the rusted gates that barred the mine's entrance. The sign was barely hanging on, faded letters warning, "Danger, abandoned mine." I slipped through a gap in the fence, my boots crunching on loose gravel. I switched on my flashlight and took a deep breath. The air inside smelled like mold and rust, thick with the weight of decades without fresh air. My heart was pounding, not from fear, but from the cold thrill of the unknown. I started down the narrow stairway carved into the rock. The walls were slick with moisture, and my flashlight beam caught patches of old mining equipment, broken carts, and shattered wooden beams. Somewhere deeper, water dripped steadily, echoing like a slow, haunting heartbeat. My plan was simple: document everything, get some footage, and find out what really happened here. The locals wouldn't talk openly, but the rumors were enough to keep me awake at night. People claimed they heard whispers in the dark, saw eyes glowing in the tunnels, felt something brush past them when no one was there. I was skeptical. But as I moved deeper, the air grew colder, and a creeping sense of dread wrapped around me like a fog. The deeper I went, the more the silence pressed in. No bird song, no city noise, only the drip of water and the distant hollow creaks of old timber shifting under unseen weight. Every step bouncing back to me like a warning. At one point, I paused to catch my breath, shining my flashlight around a small alcove. There, half buried in dust and rubble, lay a faded helmet and a broken pickaxe. A rusted helmet, cracked and dented, told stories I could only imagine. Men had worked here once. Men who never came back. The air tasted metallic. I reached out to steady myself on the rough wall and noticed something odd. Scratch marks, deep and uneven, trailing away from the main tunnel, like desperate claw marks. I shivered, running a gloved finger over them, too deep to be from normal mining equipment. almost like something alive had made them. I shook off the feeling, telling myself it was just my imagination. I was here to find facts, not ghosts. But then, a sudden noise cut through the darkness, a low, guttural sound that seemed to vibrate through the rock itself. It was far off, somewhere deeper, but close enough to set my nerves on fire. I froze. The sound wasn't human. It wasn't animal. It was something else, something ancient. My flashlight flickered, and for a split second, I thought I saw a figure standing at the far end of the tunnel, a silhouette too tall and twisted to be a man. When I blinked, it was gone. Heart hammering, I pressed on, telling myself to stay calm. I reached into my backpack for my camera, wanting to capture everything, even if just to prove I wasn't crazy. As I moved further, the temperature dropped sharply. My breath came out in visible puffs, fogging in the beam of my flashlight. I wasn't sure if it was cold air coming from some deep underground source or something else, something unnatural. Then came the smell, a sickly sweet stench like decayed flesh mixed with sulfur. It hit me suddenly, making me gag. I covered my mouth with my sleeve, trying not to lose my dinner. And that's when I heard it again. The slow, dragging shuffle of something moving just out of sight, always staying at the edge of my vision. I spun around, flashlight wild, but found nothing but empty tunnel. I was not alone. Something was down there with me. The realization came slowly, like water seeping through cracked stone. At first, I thought it might just be old pipes shifting, echoes of my own movements. But the shuffling noise returned, closer now, heavier, rhythmic. Whatever it was moving with purpose, and it knew I was here. I forced myself to keep going. I had mapped the route beforehand, one main tunnel, then a fork leading to a collapsed elevator shaft. My goal was to reach the old service chambers at the bottom, rumored to be where the strangest events had occurred. But every step deeper into the earth felt like a betrayal of instinct, like I was walking straight into something that didn't want to be found. About 30 minutes in, I came across the first real sign that something had gone horribly wrong here. A chamber opened up to my left, filled with rusted lockers and old mining suits. But one of them, just one, stood upright in the center of the room, as if someone had just stepped out of it. The helmet was resting neatly on top. The boots were pointed toward the tunnel, as if waiting. I approached it slowly. My flashlight trembled in my hand. When I got close enough, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. There were nail marks, deep, frantic gouges on the inside of the helmet's visor, and inside the suit, tucked in the folds of the collar, was a tongue. Human, dried, blackened, and twisted. I stumbled back, bile rising in my throat. What kind of sick joke was this? Suddenly, behind me, clang. A pipe fell from the ceiling, crashing onto the stone just a few feet away. The noise echoed like thunder, and I spun around hard in my throat. The tunnel behind me was empty. But the suit was no longer standing. It was on the ground. I swear to God, I didn't hear it fall. I didn't even blink. But it was now lying on its side, helmet rolled a few feet away like it had been knocked over. I didn't scream. I should have. But fear has a way of muting you, paralyzing your body while your mind screams for you to run. I backed away slowly, shining my light into every corner, every shadow. But there was nothing there. Just me. And the growing sense that something was watching. About 10 more minutes of walking brought me to the fork in the tunnel. One path led deeper, toward the elevator shaft. The other, blocked by a rusted iron gate, disappeared into darkness. I checked my map again. The elevator shaft was dangerous, but it was supposed to lead straight to the lower service levels. That's where I needed to go. I made my way down carefully, descending a set of cracked concrete stairs that spiraled around the shaft. My flashlight barely reached the bottom. It was at least 60 feet down. Halfway through the descent, my foot slipped on something wet. I caught myself, heart slamming, and aimed my light downward. Blood. Fresh. Still wet. It ran down the steps, thick and dark, pooling in the cracks like ink. There were no bodies, no source, just a long red trail leading deeper. And then the whispers began. Faint at first, like someone speaking behind a thick wall. Then louder and louder. Dozens of voices, whispers overlapping, urgent, hungry. Turn back. He's here. So hungry. I pressed my ears, but the sound wasn't coming from outside. It was inside my head. Something had noticed me, and it wanted me to know.
I must have stood there, flashlight trembling in my hand for a full minute after I stepped off that rusted ladder and felt solid ground again. But it wasn't just the ground. It was something else. The texture under my boots felt wrong, uneven, organic even, like I'd stepped onto something that didn't want to be stepped on. The air was different down here, thick, metallic, damp with something that clung to my throat. Every breath felt like a mouthful of rust. I clicked my flashlight across the tunnel ahead. It stretched in both directions, swallowed by shadows that seemed to breathe with me. My instinct screamed at me to climb back up, but my pride, and my stupid need to prove something, shoved that voice down. I started walking. The tunnel walls were covered in old piping and wires that had long since been eaten by corrosion. Water dripped from above, echoing into the silence like a metronome of dread. Each step I took felt heavier than the last, not because of exhaustion, but because of the growing realization that I wasn't alone down here. There was movement. Subtle at first, shifts in the air, echoes that didn't match my pace. Then came the smell, a rotting stench so foul it made my stomach fold in on itself. I covered my mouth and pressed on. 10 minutes in, I found something that didn't belong. An old duffel bag. American brand, torn. It looked like it had been gnawed on. There were scratches around it, deep grooves in the concrete floor, almost like claw marks, but not the work of rats. It was too organized, too deliberate. Not the work of rats. I knelt to check inside. A torn piece of clothing, an old cassette recorder, cracked down the middle, and blood. Dried, dark, thick. My pulse kicked into overdrive. I knew then I wasn't the first one down here, and whoever had come before didn't make it out. I should have turned around. But curiosity's a funny thing. It overrides reason. It drowns out common sense. It whispers just a little further. So I kept walking. The deeper I went, the more unnatural everything became. The concrete began to twist, not in shape, but in feeling. The ground didn't feel like it was made by men anymore. The walls curved in strange ways with holes that looked less like ventilation and more like breathing passages. The rusted piping thinned, then disappeared entirely. That's when I saw the symbols. Etched in the wall in what looked like dried tar were markings, lines and loops that made no linguistic sense but triggered something primal in my brain. They were wrong. Not just alien, but offensive to logic. My flashlight flickered the moment I pointed it at them. The light itself didn't want to touch them. Suddenly, I heard something. Not water, not rats. Breathing. Heavy. Wet. Just around the bend. I killed my light and pressed myself against the wall, heart slamming in my chest. The sound grew louder, dragged breaths that rasped like they were being forced through a broken windpipe. I had my knife on my belt, but not that it would have done any good. The breathing passed and faded, but the silence that followed was worse. It was the kind of silence that made you feel watched, like something was waiting for you to move. I turned the flashlight back on. The battery was already half dead. I should have left, but I couldn't. Not yet. About 50 feet down, I came to a fork, 2 branching paths, both pitch black, both equally uninviting. One sloped upward slightly, the other descended deeper into what looked like a collapsed section of tunnel. That same gut feeling I'd ignored earlier screamed again. It told me to go up. So naturally, I went down. I crawled over the rubble and squeezed through a narrow gap in the wall where the collapse had opened into a new chamber. This wasn't part of any tunnel system. It was older, much older. The ceiling arched high above me, covered in roots and mold and bone. It looked like bone, carved ribs fused into stone, arching over my head like the inside of some ancient beast's rib cage. The floor sloped down toward a pool, thick, still, and black. It didn't reflect my light. It absorbed it. Around the edges, I saw more markings, this time carved into the floor. Spirals, claw marks, a single boot half buried in the grime. I crouched beside the pool. That was my second mistake. The first ripple started in the center. Then came the faintest splash. Something rose just beneath the surface. Not fast, not aggressive, just aware. That's when I heard the whisper. It wasn't in the air. It was inside my head. You came too far. I staggered back, tripping over rubble and slamming my back into the curved wall. The flashlight slipped from my fingers and spun on the ground, the beam dancing wildly over the room. For a split second, it illuminated something behind the pool, tall, pale, and wrong. It moved as if it were made of tendon stretched over wire. No skin, just sinew, and a face that wasn't a face. No eyes, no mouth, just a smooth, pulsating surface that shifted when it turned toward the light. Then the flashlight died. I fumbled for my backup light, yanked it from my belt and turned it on. Nothing. Dead. My chest tightened. My breaths turned shallow. Then, the smell. It was behind me. I ran, crawled through the rubble like a lunatic, scraping my hands and knees raw. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I could feel it, hear it, moving behind me, without making a sound. It didn't walk. It slid, like flesh against flesh. When I reached the main tunnel again, I bolted left, or maybe right. I couldn't tell. I just ran. The breathing returned. Not from behind, from ahead. 2 directions, 1 sound. I turned off my light, hugged the wall, and waited, my entire body trembling, teeth chattering. And then I saw it. A faint glow up ahead, like a lantern, orange, flickering. Firelight? I crept toward it. That's when I found the room. It looked like a maintenance hub, old tools, rusted metal desks, a shattered clock on the wall stuck at 3:13. The firelight was coming from a barrel in the center, still burning, still warm. Someone had been here. Recently. There were drawings on the wall, hundreds of them, all in black charcoal, all showing the same figure. Tall, faceless, arms too long, standing over cowering humans or rising from the tunnels like some ancient god. And then I heard it again. The whisper. But this time, it said my name. I don't remember falling asleep. Maybe it wasn't sleep at all, just my mind retreating into itself, trying to escape what my eyes had seen, what my ears had heard. I came to with a jerk, my head against the cold rock wall, the flashlight in my lap flickering like it was gasping for life. I didn't know how long I'd been out. An hour? A day? It was impossible to tell down here. Time didn't flow the same way underground. What woke me was the sound. Not a footstep, not the distant clang of metal like before. It was breathing. Slow, deep, wet. It was coming from the wall. I pressed my ear against the stone, half mad, desperate to convince myself it was a trick of my exhausted brain. But it was there, a rhythmic expansion and contraction, like lungs. I could feel the faintest pulse. The wall was alive. I scrambled back, dragging my bag, nearly dropping the flashlight. The beams swung wildly, painting the tunnel with chaos until it finally steadied. And that's when I saw it again. The same mark from earlier. 3 gouges across the stone. But now, they were fresh. No dust had settled into them, no erosion. They were oozing something dark, something that glistened, black and red. I started moving, my boots scraping against the ground with panic in every step. I didn't even know which direction I was heading anymore. I had stopped caring about maps, about logic. I needed light. I needed air. I needed out. The tunnel narrowed the further I went, forcing me to hunch, then crawl. My pack kept catching on the jagged rocks behind me. At one point, I heard a crack, a zipper giving way, and suddenly I was dragging half its contents behind me like dead weight. I let it go. I couldn't stop. That's when I saw the cables again. Not mine, not from the mining days. These were newer, rubber-coated, black, running along the side of the tunnel like veins. Some were torn, wires exposed, sparking faintly like nerves twitching after trauma. I followed them, not because I trusted them, but because something told me they led somewhere. And I was right. I found the chamber. It was massive. A dome, carved or perhaps grown deep beneath the city. My flashlight barely scratched the surface of it. The walls were covered in what looked like fungus, flesh. I couldn't tell. It pulsed with a faint amber light, like a heartbeat echoing through muscle. And in the center, God help me, was a figure tied to a rusted steel chair, head slumped forward, breathing, barely. "Hello?" I croaked, voice dry and cracking. The figure stirred, slowly, like it took every ounce of energy just to lift his head. He was American, no doubt about it. Gaunt, with sunken eyes, skin like parchment. A patch on his torn jacket read, USMC. I thought I was the last one, he whispered. His name was Raymond, a Marine who went missing 2 years ago on a private expedition down these same tunnels. He was vague. I don't know if it was the trauma, the dehydration, or if he was deliberately hiding something. But he spoke of a room beneath the room, a place they shouldn't have reached. They told us not to go past level 4, but we kept pushing. Something about the readings. The walls weren't right. What do you mean, not right? They grew back, he rasped. We carved paths, marked our way. Every time we turned around, the cuts were gone. I tried to help him up, but his legs were too weak. I had to half carry him across the chamber. The moment we crossed the threshold into the tunnel again, I felt the pressure shift, like the entire place had been watching us, and now it was angry. We didn't get far. From behind us came the screech. Not human, not animal. It was like steel being torn apart, mixed with the guttural growl of something ancient. I turned and saw nothing, just that same tunnel. But I knew better now. I knew that it didn't need eyes to see us. It was the walls. It was everything. And then came the voice. Not Raymond's, not mine. It echoed from the stone itself. You were not invited. The flashlight flickered, and for a second we were plunged into total blackness. And in that second, I felt something brush against my leg. Not a rat, not a snake. It was warm, wet, grasping. Raymond screamed. When the light returned, he was gone. Just gone. Not dragged, not taken down the tunnel. There was no blood, just the chair, empty, and something scratched into the floor beneath it. One remains. I collapsed. I cried into the void, but the tunnel didn't care. The thing inside it didn't care. I was back where I started, alone, terrified, and sinking deeper into a hell I couldn't understand. But I kept moving, not because I believed I'd survive, but because stopping meant surrendering to it, whatever it was. Hours passed, or maybe days. I walked until my feet bled, until my throat was raw from breathing air that didn't belong to lungs, until I found the staircase. Yes, a staircase, perfectly formed, concrete, with rusted handrails, leading down. Of course it led down. At the top, etched into the wall in what looked like bone fragments, were words in English. Turn back. You are the last. But I couldn't. I didn't know how. My flashlight was dying. My sanity was fading. My hope had vanished. I descended, because something told me whatever lived here wasn't done with me yet.
I woke up, choking. My lungs burned like I'd been inhaling fire. I couldn't move at first. Every limb felt like it weighed 100 pounds. I was cold, soaked through, lying on jagged stone in total darkness. My flashlight was gone. At me. It was rot. Thick, wet rot, like something long dead had melted into the walls and floor. I gagged and rolled to my side, spitting out a mouthful of foul-tasting water. My head pounded. There was blood on my hands. Mine, from a gash on my scalp. I must have hit it when I fell. I had no idea how far I'd dropped. No memory of the fall. Just the cracking sound of the floor giving way, and then nothing. I forced myself to sit up. The silence was overwhelming. Even the echoes of my breath seemed muffled, swallowed by the cavern. I reached blindly around, trying to get my bearings, until my hand found a familiar shape, my backpack. Miraculously, it had landed near me. I fumbled with the zipper and found my backup flashlight. When I flicked it on, the beam stuttered weakly to life. The cavern came into view. It wasn't a tunnel anymore. It was a chamber. Massive, circular, carved into the bedrock by hands that were definitely not human. The walls were ribbed like the inside of a giant beast. Patches of something moss-like clung to the stone, pulsating faintly as if breathing. And in the center, there was water. A black pool, perfectly still, as wide as a city street. My fall had deposited me on the edge of it. I had to get out. But the only visible path was a narrow stone bridge leading across the pool to another opening in the rock wall. I didn't like the idea of crossing it, not with the water below me and God knows what inside. But staying here wasn't an option. I took a step onto the bridge. It held. I took another. Halfway across, my light flickered. The shadows danced. And then the water moved. Not a ripple, not a splash. It lowered. The surface of the pool sank as though something massive had just shifted beneath it. I froze, every muscle in my body locking tight. I aimed my light down and caught a glimpse of something just beneath the surface, pale, leathery, covered in scars. It looked like a whale or a corpse or something in between. Then, an eye opened. It wasn't round like a fish's eye. It was vertical, slitted, reptilian, and it locked on me instantly. I bolted. The rest of the bridge blurred beneath my feet as I sprinted toward the far end. I heard it then, the sound of something rising, water crashing, a screech that sounded like steel tearing in half. I didn't look back. I didn't dare. I made it to the other side and dove through the opening just as something enormous slammed into the rock behind me. The tunnel shook. Dust rained down from the ceiling. The beam of my flashlight caught the wall behind me for a second, just enough to see long claw marks gouged into the stone, fresh ones. I kept running. The new tunnel was tighter, twisted like a spiral. The further I went, the more I noticed the walls changing again. Not just stone, but flesh, or something that resembled it. The rock looked veined, wet, and warm to the touch. I passed what looked like a rib cage protruding from the wall, as if something had been built into the very bones of the mine. Whatever this place was, it wasn't made for humans. Suddenly, I heard it. Footsteps. Not mine. Not echoes. Real, deliberate footsteps behind me. But they weren't rushed. They were calm, confident. Like whatever was coming knew I had nowhere else to go. I turned off the flashlight. Stupid, maybe, but instinct took over. I didn't want to be seen. I pressed my body flat against the wall and held my breath. The footsteps grew louder. Then I saw it. Not the monster from the water. Something else. It was tall, gaunt, humanoid, but its skin was stretched too tight, like it had been wrapped in plastic and left to rot. Its head was bald, its face featureless, except for a gaping hole where the mouth should have been. No eyes, no nose, just a void that sucked in light. It passed right by me. I don't know how it didn't hear me. Maybe it didn't rely on sound. Maybe it only sensed movement. Whatever the reason, it kept walking, disappearing around a bend in the tunnel. I waited, counted to 60, then ran in the opposite direction. I didn't stop until I saw light ahead. Not daylight, some kind of artificial glow, dim and greenish. I emerged into another chamber, smaller than the last, but just as strange. It was filled with machinery, rusted generators, broken monitors, tables with straps, tools that looked more like weapons. This wasn't just a mine. It had been a lab. Someone had done this, created this, or maybe discovered it and tried to study it. Whatever the case, they were gone now. All that was left were remnants, notes pinned to the walls faded with age, schematics I couldn't understand. One phrase stood out among the mess, scrawled over and over in red ink. It sleeps below the 7th vein. What the hell did that mean? Before I could investigate further, I heard another sound. Not footsteps this time. Breathing. Not mine. I turned around slowly, and there in the doorway I had just come through was a figure, smaller than the others, human-sized, wearing a tattered jumpsuit. Its eyes glowed faintly in the dark. It whispered something I couldn't understand. Then, it lunged. I slammed the heavy metal door shut just in time. Its fists pounded against it, shrieking like a feral animal. I scrambled back, knocking over a rusted cart full of scalpels and saws. My heart hammered in my chest. I couldn't do this much longer. I had to find a way out. I had to survive, even if it meant going deeper.
There are things in this world that don't want to be seen. I wish I had never laid eyes on it. After my encounter with the silent thing at the end of the last tunnel, a fleshy, vertical slit that blinked and oozed as it contracted, something in me snapped. I couldn't scream. I couldn't cry. My breath just locked inside me, like even my lungs were afraid to make a sound. I was no longer walking through some abandoned sewage system. This was a living tomb. The walls, they'd changed. I swear they weren't made of brick and mortar anymore. They pulsed, and they sweated. When I pressed my hand against the side of the tunnel for balance, it gave, like touching wet skin. I felt something twitch beneath it, a subtle ripple under my palm as if I'd just startled something just beneath the surface. I pulled my hand away, shaking. Every instinct I had screamed for me to turn around, to run back toward the old ladder, even if I had to crawl over corpses and through cold slime. But something worse held me back. The sound of a child crying. I froze. It was faint, muffled, echoing from somewhere deeper down the corridor, high-pitched, desperate, like a boy maybe 5 or 6 years old. He wasn't saying words, just sobbing. And I realized something truly awful. The crying was coming from behind a wall. I paced the area, flashing my light over the surface, expecting to find a crack or hole. But no, the wall was seamless, flesh-like, pale, veiny. And it was moaning, not the child, the wall itself, like it was trying to mimic the cries of a child trapped behind it. That's when I understood. It wasn't a cry for help. It was bait. I stumbled backward and nearly dropped my flashlight. The moment the beam shifted, I saw something move out of the corner of my eye. Something slick and fast, skittering across the ceiling just ahead. I jerked the light up, but there was nothing. My pulse thundered in my ears. Every sound echoed longer than it should have. Water droplets, my own footsteps, that horrible weeping. It was like the place was replaying sounds back at me with a delay, like the tunnel was learning them. I pressed on. My flashlight flickered now and then. The batteries had plenty of juice, but the interference, something electromagnetic maybe, was distorting everything. My GPS still showed nothing but static. My phone had long since died. It was just me and the darkness now. And then I found the hole. It looked like a rupture in the wall, torn from the inside. Meat hung in jagged flaps. There was no other way forward. I swallowed, leaned in, and crawled through. What I found on the other side, it didn't make sense. It was a room, no longer a tunnel, a large chamber carved out in a sphere, like the inside of a giant cyst. The walls shimmered wet and pink. From the ceiling hung long rope-like strands twitching faintly, like muscular cords or exposed nerves. At the center was a pedestal, if you can call it that. A pile of bones arranged with meticulous care, all facing outward, all human. I didn't count, but there were at least 20 skulls, and in the middle of them was a small toy truck, rusty, plastic, red and blue. My heart nearly stopped. It was the same truck I had seen wedged into the grating near the surface, the one that had drawn me into the shaft in the first place.
But how the hell had it ended up down here, in the middle of this grotesque shrine? Unless someone or something wanted me to find it. I backed away slowly, flashlight trembling in my grip, my breath shallow. That's when I felt a breeze. It came from above. I looked up. There was a hole in the ceiling, circular, rimmed with fleshy ridges like a throat, and from it something stared down at me. Two massive, glowing eyes, milky white and lidless, blinked at once. Then the hole widened. Something slid through, not fast, not aggressive. It oozed like a slug, long, translucent, ridged with twitching spines. It moved like it didn't need bones. Its face had no mouth, just dozens of thin tendrils around the jaw. And where its hands should have been, there were circular, leech-like suckers. I didn't scream. I couldn't. It lowered itself from the ceiling like an enormous parasite descending into a feeding chamber. But it didn't attack. It just hovered there, observing, watching. Then it tilted its head. The tendrils on its face began to shiver, almost like they were vibrating in a specific rhythm. I realized it was listening. That's when my flashlight blinked out. Total darkness. My body froze in place, not because I wanted to, because I physically couldn't move. My limbs had locked. It was like gravity had shifted, or some unseen thing had wrapped around me. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't even blink. All I could do was feel. And what I felt was something warm slide across my neck. It whispered. Not in a language I knew, but the sound etched itself into my mind. It was low, wet, and invasive, like it was bypassing my ears and speaking directly to my brain. It knew me. It showed me. Flashes, images in my mind so fast I couldn't stop them. Scenes of other tunnels, other victims, screaming, clawing, some of them children, all of them dragged deeper, taken inside the flesh, absorbed, digested. Then, suddenly, light. My flashlight flared back on like nothing had happened. The chamber was empty. The eyes were gone. The toy truck still sat at the center of the bone circle, perfectly still. But the walls now pulsed. They were breathing faster. Whatever that thing was, it hadn't left. It had just gone deeper. I turned and ran. I didn't care where I was going anymore. I didn't care about caution or direction. I just sprinted, down tunnel after tunnel, over bone, through wet grates, past openings where I heard murmurs and sobs that could have been real or just echoes implanted in my head. I didn't stop until I collapsed, gasping against a wall that felt more like stone than flesh. My hands were shaking. My light trembled with me. That's when I saw something that stopped me cold again. Scratched into the wall, deep claw marks, and carved beneath them, crudely etched with what looked like nail files, was a single word. Stay. I couldn't breathe. And worse, the scratches were fresh.
I lost track of time long ago. Maybe it had been a few hours, maybe days. My phone was dead, and my sense of direction was completely shot. All I had was my flashlight, its beam now flickering, and the small sliver of hope that I might still find a way out of this subterranean hell. But what truly made it unbearable was the breathing. It wasn't mine, that I could recognize. This was heavier, guttural, deliberate. It came from the darkness, sometimes behind me, sometimes in front,
sometimes above, and it never echoed. That's what unsettled me the most. Down in these tunnels, sound bounced everywhere. My own footsteps were scattering all directions. But that breathing, it was always focused, close, wet. I tried telling myself it was just my mind playing tricks, that I was hearing my own breath and turning it into monsters. But I knew better. I heard it inhale when I held my breath. I had followed a narrow service pipe that ran alongside one of the larger tunnels. It was tight, barely wide enough for me to shuffle sideways through. I hoped it might lead to a maintenance exit or a junction shaft. What I didn't expect was what I found at the end. A door. Heavy, steel, old. Unlike anything I'd seen so far. There was a faded symbol on it, something like a warning, but the paint was too chipped to make sense of it. Against every instinct in my body, I twisted the handle. It opened. I stepped into a chamber that didn't match the rest of the sewer architecture. This space was rounded, like a dome, and the walls were covered in markings. Not graffiti, more like carvings, etched in sweeping, unnatural patterns. The air was different here. It felt heavier, thicker. Breathing became laborious, like something was pressing down on my chest. I crouched and ran my hand over the markings. They were deep, freshly carved. Suddenly, I heard movement behind me. I turned fast, flashlight ready. Nothing. But the breathing was back. I backed into the center of the room, flashlight sweeping in every direction. The carvings seemed to shimmer when illuminated, like they moved slightly in the corner of my eye. I heard something scuttle just out of sight, followed by the wet sound of something dragging across concrete. And then I saw it. A shape. Humanoid, but wrong. It crouched in one of the arched alcoves, skin glistening like it had never seen the sun. Limbs too long, joints too fluid. Its head tilted in an unnatural way, like it didn't understand how necks were supposed to work. Its eyes caught the beam of my flashlight. They didn't reflect, they absorbed. The creature let out a sound, not a growl, not a roar. It was speech, guttural, slurred, not human, but purposeful. And that was worse than any noise it could have made. It knew I was there. It stepped forward. I ran. Back through the door, slamming it behind me. I didn't stop to see if it would follow. I just bolted down the pipe, scraping shoulders and elbows as I squeezed through the metal tunnel. I emerged back into the larger corridor, panting, my hands shaking. But it didn't feel like escape. That room, those markings, had changed something. The air was different everywhere now, tainted. The breathing had multiplied. Now it came from everywhere. I turned left, sprinting blindly. The walls began to sweat. No, not water. This was thick, almost gelatinous. It clung to my jacket, smelled of decay. And beneath the slime, I could see more carvings, appearing, spreading, crawling. I tripped over something in the dark. I looked down. It was a boot, still attached to part of a leg. The rest of the body was gone. I dropped the flashlight and vomited. As I wiped my mouth and picked the flashlight back up, I saw more bones, scattered, arranged. Some gnawed, some fused into the walls themselves, like the place had digested them. I wasn't alone down here. I had never been. Eventually, I found a vertical shaft. It had a service ladder, rusted but intact. I didn't care where it led. I started climbing, ignoring the slick texture coating the rungs. Each breath felt heavier, like something was pulling me down. Halfway up, I heard it again. The creature. No, creatures. Multiple sets of footsteps, crawling, climbing, whispering.
One of them mimicked my own voice. "Help! Please, help me!" I nearly slipped. My hand gripped tighter, blood smearing on metal. I forced myself upward, rung by rung, until I reached the hatch. It wouldn't budge. The whispers got louder. I screamed, slammed my shoulder against the hatch, again and again. Finally, it gave. I pulled myself into a narrow crawl space, gasping, the hatch slamming shut behind me. Silence returned, but it felt temporary. I dragged myself forward, hoping for an exit, anything. Then I saw something ahead, a faint glow, not light, bioluminescence. Green, pulsing veins running along the walls, like the whole tunnel was alive. The warmth returned, the air shimmered. And then I heard it above me, scraping, breathing. They were already here.
I don't remember how long I ran. Time doesn't work the same down here. There's no sun, no moon, no shifting of light to guide the rhythm of your body. Only the pulse of your panic and the sound of your own boots slapping against uneven stone. The air was so thick, it felt like I was drowning with every breath. Every turn I took, the tunnels got tighter, the walls more alive. Veins pulsed beneath the surface, and when I touched them for balance, I swear I felt them twitch, like they were sensing me, tasting me. I had to keep going. At some point, I passed through an archway I hadn't seen before. Unlike the others made of brick or stone, this one was made of bone. Not animal, not human. Something in between. Something worse. And yet, I stepped through it. Because behind me came the noise again, the dragging, the rasping, the wet thud of claws on stone. My light flickered, sputtered, and finally died. Darkness swallowed me whole. That's when I heard it speak. Not in words, not in any language I could recognize, but I heard it in my mind, like a thought someone else forced into me. It didn't ask questions, it made statements. You came to be devoured. You came to feed it. I wanted to scream, to tell it no, I didn't, that this was a mistake, that I wasn't supposed to be here. But I knew it wouldn't matter. The thing in the dark didn't care. It wasn't some intelligent creature with motives. It was instinct, hunger, a black hole of flesh and need. The ground beneath me shifted again, suddenly slick. I slipped, fell hard on my back, and slid down what felt like a slope of meat. It writhed beneath me, groaned, like I was sliding down a throat. And then the air opened up. I landed hard in what I first thought was a cavern, but when my eyes adjusted, I realized it wasn't hollow. It was living. A massive chamber of pulsating tissue lined with rows of barbed ribs and twitching appendages. The walls expanded and contracted, breathing. In the center was a hole, a gaping mouth, a maw the size of a van lined with jagged, asymmetrical teeth and tongues. Yes, tongues, each moving independently, tasting the air. The stench was overwhelming. Rot, blood, chemicals that made my eyes tear up and my nose bleed. I was at the stomach of the beast, and I wasn't alone. Around me, sprawled across the chamber floor, were bodies, dozens, some recent, some long dead. Some were people, some were things I couldn't identify. All of them were broken, discarded, partially eaten. I saw a hand still gripping a flashlight, a foot sticking out of a backpack. One man was alive, barely, his eyes bulging, mouth trying to form words, but only blood came out. I stumbled back,
heart pounding, brain screaming for escape, but there was no way back up. The tunnel I slid down was now sealed behind a curtain of muscle and bone. And that's when it came from the shadows. The thing. The creature that haunted me since I arrived. Tall, hunched, with limbs too long and a face like a twisted mockery of humanity. Its mouth unhinged in 3 parts, revealing rows of needle-like teeth and a tongue that swayed like a serpent. It hissed, not from its mouth, but from its entire body, as if every pore exhaled hate. It approached slowly, savoring my fear. I reached for anything. My belt, my backpack, my boots. I had no weapons, no chance. But then my hand found the flare I had forgotten. One red flare, wet but intact. I snapped it. The chamber erupted in crimson light and the creature recoiled, shrieking in pain. Smoke poured from its skin as if it were burning. It flailed wildly, crashing into the bodies around it, tearing through flesh and bone in confusion. I used the moment to run, not away, but into the maw. It sounds insane, I know, but in that moment, with nowhere else to go, I chose the only direction the monster wouldn't expect, the only place it feared. I dove into the gaping mouth. It was like being born in reverse, tight, wet, suffocating. The walls convulsed around me, trying to crush me. Teeth grazed my legs, one slicing deep into my thigh. I screamed, but the tunnel swallowed the sound. Everything was blood. Everything was heat. I thought I would die there, that it would crush my ribs or digest me alive. But then I dropped onto a solid floor of stone. I was out? No, not out. Somewhere else. The air was stale, the silence deafening. I stood slowly, shaking, bleeding, and I looked around. This wasn't part of the creature. This was something older, a ruin, stone walls marked with symbols that twisted if you stared too long. Torches burned on their own, and in the center, a stairway, spiraling down. And at the top of the stairs, a voice. Familiar. You shouldn't be here. I turned and my jaw dropped. It was him, my friend, the one who disappeared 6 months ago, the one whose trail led me to this cursed place. He was alive, but not the same.
The air was colder than it had ever been. My breath fogged in front of me, and the flashlight's beam barely cut through the darkness anymore. I could feel it again, that static pressure in the tunnel's atmosphere, like the moment right before a thunderclap. My ears rang, my chest tightened. I had felt this once before, right before I first saw it crawling on the ceiling. I don't remember screaming, but my throat was raw, so I must have. I hadn't slept in 2 days. Food was a memory. My body was running on pure adrenaline in spite. But I wasn't alone. Not anymore. Something was following me. It didn't walk. It scraped. A dragging, bone-on-stone scrape that echoed behind me no matter how far I ran. The tunnel curved, split, and sloped, but the sound never left. I'd caught glimpses now and then, something long, pale, and human-shaped, but wrong. Arms that bent backwards, a torso stretched like it was pulled through a meat grinder. And those eyes, milky white, yet aware. It was learning. The deeper I went, the less the tunnel felt like a man-made structure. The bricks turned to jagged rock. The air grew damp and slick with rot. The walls pulsed with a heartbeat I could hear through my boots. At first, I thought I was going mad, but then I heard it from up ahead. Voices. Not just one, multiple. Some whispering, some crying, one of them laughing. And then I saw them. Not people, fragments of people. Mouths stitched to walls, fingers poking from the stone, flexing as if trying to dig free. One man's face was stretched across the ceiling like wallpaper, his eyes still blinking. I pressed forward, not because I was brave, God no, but because I couldn't turn back. Whatever was behind me wasn't going to let me leave. The deeper I went, the more it wanted me down there. At one point, I slipped into a chamber. It was vast and dome-shaped, filled with what I first mistook for roots. But as I got closer, I realized they were bones, human bones, interwoven like a massive breathing nest. The ceiling above was soft, fleshy. Something pulsed behind it. I think I was inside it. I turned to leave, but then I heard her voice, my sister's. "Ethan," she whispered, "please help me." It stopped me cold. I hadn't heard her voice in years, not since the day she disappeared. She was 22, full of life, and had gone backpacking through Eastern Europe. We got a postcard from her once, then silence. Cops chalked it up to getting lost. I never believed that. The voice echoed again, louder, weaker, like she was being strangled as she spoke. I ran toward it. I don't know why. Stupidity, maybe, or maybe some part of me still thought I could save her. I found the source of the voice in a corner of the chamber, where a twisted humanoid figure was curled into the wall, bound by a mesh of bone and muscle. Her face was close, too close to hers, but warped, melted. Her mouth opened unnaturally wide. "Ethan," she moaned, as if forced to speak, "it hurts." That's when I realized the voice wasn't hers. It was using her voice. I stepped back and the thing's arms twitched. They were long, too long, and its fingernails were bone needles. It began to rise, skin tearing from the wall. Blood pooled beneath it, but it moved like a marionette, limbs jerking, head twisting. I ran. No plan, no weapon, no map. I sprinted into the unknown, deeper still, because going back meant facing whatever had become of that thing. Eventually, the tunnel narrowed so tightly I had to crawl. Each movement scraped my elbows and knees against jagged stone. My flashlight flickered, batteries dying. My breathing was hoarse. Behind me, the scrape. Closer now. I reached a hatch in the floor, iron, heavy, bolted, but I saw the mechanism, rusted but breakable. I kicked it with everything I had, again, my foot numb. On the sixth strike, it cracked open. I dropped through. I landed in water, freezing, waist deep, and then the smell hit me. Decay, worse than anything I'd ever imagined. The water was thick with filth and something else, pieces of things I didn't want to identify. But it was quiet here, for now. Above me, the hatch slammed shut. Whatever was following me didn't chase me into the water. And for the first time in what felt like days, I cried. I don't know how long I stood there. Eventually, I waded forward, down a slope. The tunnel began to incline upward again. The air changed, still rancid, but lighter. My flashlight gave out entirely, so I used my phone screen, dim as it was. I walked until I saw light, natural light, faint enough to feel like a hallucination, but it was real. A hole in the ceiling, no bigger than a manhole cover, where roots hung down like fingers. I climbed. It was hell, slippery, vertical, the stone crumbling in my hands, but I climbed like a man possessed. Above me, I heard birds, wind, life. I pulled myself out, covered in blood, waste, and filth, and rolled onto damp grass. I was out. Somewhere in the forest. I didn't know the country, let alone the region, but the sun was rising, and I was alive. I lay there for hours. When I finally stumbled onto a road, a truck driver nearly crashed trying to avoid me. He didn't speak English, but he took one look at me and knew I had seen hell. I never told the police the whole truth. I just said I got lost spelunking alone. That seemed to satisfy them. But here's the part I didn't say. 2 weeks later, I got a voicemail. Blocked number, no caller ID. But the voice was hers again. "Ethan," it said, "you were so close." Then silence. And I've heard it once more, every month since. I didn't think my body could hurt more than it already did. My legs were stiff from days of crawling through stone corridors. My throat burned raw from thirst, and my stomach gnawed at itself like a starving animal. But it was nothing compared to the ache in my mind, the relentless pressure of paranoia, fear, and grief. The tunnel ahead looked the same as every other, but something told me this one would be different. This was where it would all come to an end. Behind me, the air pulsed with that awful low hum again, the one that had haunted me since I first stepped beyond the collapsed ladder. It had grown louder, more alive. It didn't echo like a machine. It vibrated like breathing, and it was following me. I stumbled forward, my boot slipping on damp stone. The walls were tighter here, narrowing as if the tunnel itself didn't want me passing through. I pushed anyway, scraping my shoulders, gritting my teeth against the pain. I wasn't going to die down here. Not now, not like this. And then I saw it. The light. Faint, flickering, but real. It wasn't the cold white of my flashlight or the unnatural glow of those pulsating growths I'd seen before. This light was yellow and warm and human, like a lantern or a candle. Hope stabbed through my chest so hard I nearly cried out. I pushed toward it, heart pounding, ignoring the pain. The tunnel opened into a small chamber, the first one I'd seen in what felt like hours, maybe days. And in the center of it, perched on a rock, was a lantern. Real, metal, burning. And beside it, someone was sitting. I froze. The figure was hunched over, facing away from me. A man maybe, thin, wearing tattered clothing that hung from his frame like old rags. His head twitched to the side as if he'd heard me. Slowly, he turned. My blood iced over. His face was wrong. It wasn't monstrous, not like the thing I'd seen before, but it was warped by something deeper. His eyes were too wide, his pupils too small, and his mouth was cracked into a smile so broad it looked painted on. He blinked, slowly, deliberately, and then spoke. "I knew you'd come." My voice caught in my throat. He stood. Every movement was rigid, unnatural, like a puppet yanked by invisible strings. I stepped back, reaching for the jagged pipe I'd tucked into my belt hours ago. My fingers were slick with sweat, but I gripped it tight. "Don't worry," he said. "You'll see it soon, too." "See what?" I managed. He raised a hand and pointed to the wall behind me. I turned. It looked like every other wall until I noticed the crack. a vertical line barely visible in the stone. Something about it shimmered, like heat rising from asphalt. Without thinking, I stepped toward it. "No!" shouted the man suddenly. "Not yet!" I spun back to him. His face had changed. The grin was gone. Now his expression twisted with fear, real bone-deep fear. "They're watching," he whispered. "They don't want you to leave." The hum returned, stronger, closer. It wasn't coming from behind anymore. It was coming from the wall. The crack widened. A sliver of darkness opened, not just shadow, but an impossible blackness that seemed to suck the light out of the room. The lantern flickered, the man screamed, and something stepped out. It wasn't the creature I'd seen before. This one was different, taller, gaunt. It moved like water, limbs bending in wrong directions, a body wrapped in strands of flesh that fluttered like seaweed in a current. No face, just a blank canvas of skin. But I felt its attention settle on me. I ran. There was nowhere to go, but I ran anyway, back into the tunnel, back into the dark. The pipe clanged against my leg. The scream behind me was cut off with a wet, choking sound. I didn't look back. My mind was unraveling. I turned corners without thinking, slid down slopes I couldn't climb back up. I followed the air, any faint breeze I could feel on my skin. I was bleeding. My ears rang, but I didn't stop. Eventually, I saw it. A ladder. Another one, this one newer, not rusted. It bolted into the stone wall leading up into a metal hatch. It looked like salvation, like the first real sign that I might live through this. I climbed. The rungs were slick, my grip weak, but I climbed. The hum faded behind me. When I pushed the hatch open, sunlight hit my face. Actual, real sunlight. I pulled myself up and collapsed on gravel. My eyes adjusted. I was in some kind of industrial yard, rusted containers, concrete walls overgrown with weeds. No people, no vehicles, but I could see the sky, the open sky. I sobbed. I don't remember how long I lay there, just breathing, alive. When I finally sat up, I looked back at the hatch. No markings, no warnings, just a rusted metal square in the ground like a maintenance access. I wanted to seal it, weld it shut, burn it down. But I didn't. Instead, I stood and walked. I didn't know where I was. The language on the signs was unfamiliar, somewhere in Eastern Europe maybe. I found a road eventually, flagged down a car. The driver didn't speak English, but he took me to a police station. They didn't believe a word I said. There were no records of an American going missing. My passport had been torn apart by moisture. My phone, dead. They asked where I'd been. I couldn't answer. I didn't even know the name of the town where I'd entered those tunnels. Everything blurred together. Eventually, the embassy got involved. They flew me home. I've been back in the States for 6 weeks now. I've seen therapists, priests, skeptics. No one can explain what I saw. They say it was hallucination, trauma, isolation, psychosis. But I know what I saw. I know what I heard. And last night, I heard the hum again from my basement.
I don't remember how I got out. Not fully. Bits and pieces flash in my memory, like scattered photographs. I remember crawling, bleeding, coughing up black water. I remember daylight stabbing my eyes after what felt like days underground. I remember waking up in a hospital somewhere outside Timishara, a nurse saying I had been found collapsed by a drainage exit 3 miles from the site I had entered. 3 miles! I was missing for 8 days. 8 days down there. The authorities said it was likely a delirium-induced psychotic break due to dehydration and claustrophobia.
They claimed I probably wandered through old war tunnels or sewer branches that aren't on any map, that I hallucinated the rest, that I imagined the sounds, the creatures, the teeth. But I know what I saw, and more importantly, what I heard. I've never spoken publicly about it, not really, until now. But every time I close my eyes, I hear them again. The whispering things, the sucking, chewing noises, the screams. Some mine, some not. Back in the States, I tried to go back to normal, but there's no normal after that. I've had sleep paralysis every other night. I see eyes in my walls. I keep my lights on at night, even in hotels, even when I travel. And sometimes I still wake up choking on air that smells like rust. The thing is, I left something down there. A part of me. Maybe a piece of my soul. But worse, something may have come back with me. It's subtle. It doesn't show itself outright. It lives in reflections that lag just a second too long, in phone static, in dreams that feel too real. I've tried therapy, hypnosis, even medication, but nothing helps. Last week, I woke up and found muddy footprints on my apartment floor. They led from my bedroom window to the bathroom. The window was locked from the inside. I live on the 5th floor. My story isn't a warning. It's a confession. I went somewhere no one was meant to go. I looked too deep, chased something I didn't understand, and thought I could come back whole. I was wrong. I'm a fracture now, a man who is haunted not by what he left behind, but what followed. So if you ever find a ladder leading into the dark in some forgotten part of a foreign country, if you ever hear a second voice when you're supposed to be alone, don't answer it. Don't investigate. Don't be like me. Because down there, below the streets, below the world we know, there are things older than bones and deeper than fear. And once they know your name, they never forget it.